Hi everyone, welcome to TCED 7301, Curriculum, Pedagogy, and Practice. My name is Dr. William Kearns. I will be your professor in this graduate level course. First, a little bit of an introduction about me. I'm entering my second year at University of Arkansas Little Rock. I'm an assistant professor of education here. I'll introduce myself more in another video that I'm going to make. I've been a professor in St. Louis before I came to University of Arkansas Little Rock, and before that I taught high school English and reading in Central Florida. So if you call me by cell phone, please text me as opposed to just simply cold calling me. That way I know who's calling me. If you email me, I try to respond immediately when I can, but obviously I'm not going to always be on email. So that being said, I try to keep a policy of at least emailing back within 48 hours. Hopefully that's quick enough. Normally I try to be much faster than that. Obviously, with office hours and we're in the middle of a pandemic and all that stuff, I'm probably not going to be in my physical office necessarily all the time, but I am available at least by Zoom or other means of communication by a video conference, by appointment. I try to be very available that way in terms of virtual office hours. Okay, so the course description you can see, we focus on understanding how curriculum has been evolving around given issues and ideas in the history of the field. We'll look at the curriculum underlying philosophical commitments in here. Basically, we'll look at a number of debates. Do we focus on core content areas, history, social studies? Do we focus on preparing students to meet the needs of society? Do we focus on students on just the essential skills that they need in order to have a vocation? Do we focus students on meeting what it means to be human and self-actualized? Do we prepare students to meet social justice and address social inequities? All of those things, depending on which one of those areas you prioritize, will build you towards shaping your curriculum in very different ways. And we'll look at how those debates have evolved in the field. We'll also look at various learning theories out there. There are, of course, many different ways of understanding how people learn. Is learning a social constructed process? Is learning sort of similar to a computer in terms of information processing models? Is learning very much behavioristic? How do we understand learning? Also very much shapes curriculum. Issues of morality and what does it mean to be moral, and how do we define morality and ethics also very much shapes our understanding of curriculum. What is reality? What's the nature of reality? Depending on how you define that, will also shape. For instance, is reality basically something that we socially understand through a construction in our mind, or is there something called a real reality? All of that will shape curriculum. That's something we've been debating over the years since the ancient days of Greece and before. We'll work off of a textbook by Shiro, Curriculum Theory, Conflicting Visions, and Enduring Concerns. This is not one of the most intellectually deep books I could have chosen, but it provides me with a good leaping point to talk about the various debates in the field, drawing on a historian named Herbert Claiborne. And so I'm going to supplement this text with a great deal of journal articles. And the journal articles give you more intellectual depth that I want for you in this course. So I want you to explore the breadth and the depth. Shiro gives you the breadth, and the journal articles that I've chosen will give you the depth that I want you to have in this course. Both things are important. So that was my basis for choosing that. Many of these things on the syllabus you can read for yourself. It's boilerplate syllabus material, but then I want to get to late work I do have a standard legwork policy. This is slightly different than the policy I have for my undergraduate classes. I'm teaching both graduate as well as undergraduate courses this semester at University of Arkansas Little Rock. For graduate students, legwork will not be accepted except with the approval of myself. Now, that being said, I realize that many of you, and probably all of you at the graduate level, are full-time practicing teachers. You're teaching in the middle of a pandemic, for crying out loud. There's probably going to be a time when you do tell me that something has come up. I'm going to be understanding with school situations, personal situations, work situations, and all that stuff. Just all I ask is give me the courtesy of requesting and let me know what's going on. And I'll be understanding, don't worry. Okay, then we go into the nature of our assignments. On a weekly basis, we'll have journal and chapter reflections for you to write. These are fairly much breadth and depth, so they are quite a bit of work. I really would like to have a minimum of 1 to 2 pages on each of your reflections, double space, Times New Roman. And please, by the way, if you don't have a copy of the 7th edition of the APA style guide, make sure you do have that, because of course, for those of you that will eventually get doctorates, the APA 7th edition is standard issue, so make sure that you are following the 7th edition APA style guide. We'll have some discussion boards, not all that many, not necessarily every week, but we will have some discussion boards. We'll have a best practices final paper, which also counts as a final exam due at the end of the course. This gets into your really deep analysis. It pulls everything together. It's basically synthesizing what you've been learning into a paper dealing with how do you apply this in practice. And you'll see some of the best practice papers that have been published in the field that do exactly this. And I want you to use those as kind of mentor texts. I've written some best practices papers myself, co-authored, that have been published. And so you can use my best practices papers as kind of a model for you to follow in here. The word length that I'm requiring is less than would be typically required in a journal article. Usually a best practices type paper in an actual published article would be about 4,000 to 5,000 or so words minimum. Again, you can see what I'm looking for here with some of the frameworks that we'll be looking for. Okay, so key dates to remember. You can see that that's obvious. Your weekly calendar is subject to change, and you can read this on your own a little bit. I have given you August 28th through the end of the course, an overview of things that we'll cover. Basically, I'll start us off talking about personal introductions in week 1, and there's an article at the end of the week 1 about why is it important to study the history of education, drawing on Herbert Kleberg. Kleberg's approach to this debate is foundational to this course. So I would really recommend you looking up more about Herbert Kleberg. Okay, in week 2, we get into, of course, the course introduction and introduction to some of these curriculum ideologies that we'll be studying. And we'll read more about in chapter 1 here. And there's an article for you to read. Then September 11th, we get more into chapter 2, the scholar academic ideology, and we'll get into some of the debates in the field of English language arts during this week. Should English language arts be content-based, or should we be dealing with multicultural literature and diverse literature? That's been a fairly fierce debate over the years, and so we'll look at that. Every assignment, by the way, as you can see, the pattern is due on a Friday by midnight. When it comes to meeting in person for classes, I will send out basically a poll during the first week. I'll ask you what day and time of day is best for you to meet, and I'll ask you basically, are you available in a certain period of time, or are you not available? And we won't have an in-person meeting during the first week, of course, because I'm going to be trying to figure out when are you available. I'm then going to, by week 2, I'm going to pick out of these available dates. I'm going to try to minimize the potential for us meeting during a time when the majority of you aren't available. We probably will leave out the mornings and early afternoons, of course, of those of you that are teaching. I'll try to pick out a day for us to meet, likely Monday through Friday. I'll try to avoid evenings weekends if I can. I'll try to pick out a day for us to meet by Zoom when the majority of you are available. Now, when it comes to keeping attendance, if you are taking part in the Zoom meeting, of course, that means you're in attendance. But if you're not able to make one of these meetings, or if we don't have a Zoom meeting on a given week, if you are turning in your responses, I'm going to count that as being present. So those of you that cannot make a Zoom meeting during one of our meetings, but you're turning in your responses, don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you when it comes to your attendance record. Okay, so due September 18th, you can see we're continuing with scholar academic ideology, and we've got that debate. September 25th, we get into social efficiency. Social efficiency basically means that you focus on preparing students to meet the needs of society. It's this factory model form of education. So we get into that with the work due September 25th. October 2nd, we continue with more a look into the social efficiency ideology, and you've got an article to read that goes along with that. October 9th, we go into learner-centered ideology. When we think of learner-centered ideology, think of Piaget, think of John Dewey, think of Lev Vygotsky, for those of you that have studied these type of issues before. You can see chapter 4 with Shiro. You can see a couple of articles that focus on Deweyan approaches to education. October 16th, you can see we get more into the social reconstructivist, social reconstruction ideology. So with this one, we deal with, of course, chapter 5. October 20th, and by social reconstructionist, I'm also thinking social justice, critical theory. October 23rd, we have more social reconstructionist. You've got another article to read. I'm drawing on critical race theory. October 30th, we deal with comparing and contrasting these views. And you've got some supplemental material with that. And then, of course, November 13th, the individual perspectives. You'll learn more about my perspective as we get into that, as well as share your own as we explore. November 20th, and you've got changing perspectives. You've gotten, and this is where I deal with some non-traditional ways of looking at it. For instance, intersections of Africana studies, and we'll draw more on Black hope, white power, emancipation. We'll draw on post-colonial and critical race ways of looking at it during this week. November 20th, we deal with the social turn in curriculum theory. And this is subject to change. You can see I've got a couple of articles by me that I have in mind. I may actually take away those articles and switch into different articles for that week. Because when I think about it, I'm not entirely satisfied with what I've got there. And then with December 4th, we deal more with the digital turn as well as the social turn in there. And you can see some of the discussion there. And then, of course, December 11th, your best practices final paper is due. And from there, you can see some recommended texts, the grading scheme, the rest you can read by yourself. I'll be more enthusiastic in the future. I'm making this one a little bit late. Hopefully this helps you. Have a good night. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed this class.